The Committee on Homeland Security regarding oversight, investigations, accountability will come to order. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine areas of rampant waste, fraud, abuse of taxpayer dollars by the Biden-Harris administration's Department of Homeland Security. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Again, welcome to the Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Accountabilities, our very first hearing of the 119th Congress, titled Eliminating Waste, Fraud, and Abuse at the Department of Homeland Security, addressing the Biden-Harris administration failures. I'm honored to be the chairman of the subcommittee, to be joined by my colleagues, distinguished guests, and experts. I also congratulate Ranking Member Thanedar for his new role. There's a lot of work that we'll be doing in this Congress, and this subcommittee is excited to be on the forefront of assisting in the reformation of the Department of Homeland Security. We'd also like to thank full committee ranking member Benny Thompson for joining us today, who I know is not here. I don't see him, but he'll be here shortly. For too long, the federal government has spent money on programs, contracts, and grants that do not promote the interest of the American people. For 4 years under the Biden-Harris administration, we've all watched taxpayer dollars entrusted with the Department of Homeland Security become subject to waste and abuse. There is no doubt that inefficient and effective use of taxpayer resources undermine our national interest. Under new leadership in the last 2 years in the House, under Republicans taking the majority, this oversight subcommittee did press hard for transparency, offered the Biden-Harris administration solutions that fell on deaf ears. The GAO, the Government Accountability Office, the Office of Inspector General, have also remained providing many recommendations that could have saved taxpayer money and assist the department in mission success. For the last several years, nonprofit organizations like the Heritage Foundation, America First Legal, the Council to Modernize Governance, who will join us today on the second panel of witnesses, have demanded transparency and accountability, but were consistently stonewalled by the government. Today, we will examine some of the rampant waste, fraud, and abuse at the Department of Homeland Security that occurred under the Biden-Harris administration and evaluate solutions. We must defend against such waste, hard-earned taxpayer resources. Failures of the Biden-Harris administration are staggering because the previous administration refused to enforce immigration law. Our American sovereign borders have been in chaos. From 21 to January of 2025, 4-year period, U.S. Customs and Border Protection encountered more than 11 million illegal aliens nationwide. Most of these 11 million illegal aliens were released and provided shelter, food, plane and bus tickets, cell phones, and cash by non-governmental organizations known as NGOs who receive billions of American taxpayer money. One Office of the Inspector General report found that DHS, Department of Homeland Security, wasted under the Biden-Harris administration at least $17 million, paying one NGO for unused bed space for illegal aliens in a hotel. That $17 million could have been spent on agent salaries, better equipment for federal law enforcement, or improved training to help protect officers and keep communities safe. In an attempt to shield the immigration crisis from the public, the Biden-Harris administration created a mass parole scheme to fly illegal aliens into the interior of the United States. These schemes were a clear abuse of power that left American citizens, vulnerable communities, exposed to criminals, cartels, and potential terrorists. A notable component of this parole scheme was Operation Allies Welcome, used to bring Afghan nationals in the United States after President Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. Multiple Inspector General reports found that DHS released Afghan nationals into the United States without adequate screening, without adequate vetting, or monitoring, leaving our country vulnerable to a national security risk from those that were coming in. In addition to the failure to protect America's borders, the Biden-Harris administration favored the use of the Federal Emergency Management Agency's, FEMA's agency's resource to support sanctuary cities and NGO, non-governmental organizations, for sheltering and caring for illegal aliens, monies that otherwise could be used elsewhere, securing our southern border. FEMA's crisis of focus has been worsened by its fragmented approach to disaster assistance, resulting in the Government Accountability Office, GAO, adding federal disaster delivery to its 2025 high-risk list for waste, fraud, and abuse. I want to reiterate that. It resulted in the GAO adding federal disaster delivery, FEMA's disaster aid, to its 2025 high-risk list for waste, fraud, and abuse, which we'll talk more about. Another DHS component that experienced a crisis of focus under the Biden-Harris administration is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. In the 118th Congress, this committee investigated and uncovered efforts by CISA to pressure social media companies to remove posts by Americans containing, quote, dis, and malinformation, end of quote, related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Republican lawmakers thankfully forced DHS to scuttle their attempts to stand up to this Disinformation Governance Board, as it's called, to further police the lawful speech of Americans online. CISA's focus on censorship instead of its statutory mission to protect our critical infrastructure from cyber threats was misguided at best, nefarious at worst. Either way, the divergence from CISA's intended mission increased the risk to our cybersecurity. Over the last several years, the Office of Inspector General found severe cyber vulnerabilities in Homeland Security's networks, including TSA, ICE, and CBP. President Trump has now augmented our efforts to return Americans to common sense on these policies. He's introduced executive orders to secure our borders, uphold the rule of law, defend against the waste of hard-earned taxpayer resources, and create transparency through the executive branch. On his first day in office, President Trump stated that he would marshal all resources available to prevent unlawful entries across the borders of the United States, to pursue criminal charges against illegal alien criminals, and regain operational control of the border from cartels and smugglers. President Trump also organized the FEMA Review Council to advise and report on potential reorganization of FEMA, leading to potentially, as the President has discussed, more state authority. Refocusing the federal government's disaster response efforts on helping Americans, including by investing greater power in state governments to perform disaster response, is long overdue. Finally, we must recognize that the executive branch has acted swiftly in recent weeks to undo much of the Biden-Harris administration's waste of taxpayer dollars. The Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, has been instrumental in exposing and suspending, even within the Department of Homeland Security, outlays on DEI programs, duplicative awards, and services for illegal immigrants. Today, we'll examine how under the Biden-Harris administration, DHS failed in its basic mission. We'll also explore opportunities for greater efficiency and cost savings in the Department of Homeland Security all across the federal government. I welcome our members, appreciate the important work ahead of us, and welcome our guests today. Thank you for joining us. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Thanedar, for his opening statement.
Good afternoon, and I want to first of all congratulate Chairman Brecken for his new role, and I'm delighted to be on this committee and work with you throughout the year and this Congress. Also welcome full committee ranking member, Mr. Thompson, to our committee here. And good afternoon to all. Look, waste, fraud, and abuse are not new. That's why Congress established legitimate entities decades ago to help identify and root it out. Those experienced government watchdogs are now being viciously attacked by President Trump and co-President Musk. During his first week in office, Trump unlawfully fired 17 inspector generals who defend against corruption and mismanagement in government. Trump falsely claimed it is a very common thing to do and pretended not to know the IGs he purged despite appointing many of them himself. Those IGs saved taxpayers $93 billion in fiscal year 2023 alone. Now that is a $26 return on every dollar spent. Such savings are only possible when IGs are truly independent from the administration they investigate. Such independence is also crucial for the Office of Special Counsel, which provides a safe place for government employees to disclose wrongdoing. So it was no surprise when Trump unlawfully fired the head of OSC last month without cause. Trump is purposefully gutting the watchdogs who can help check presidential power and replacing them with a dangerous knockoff. Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, has taken a chainsaw to the federal government, creating chaos and wreaking havoc. DOGE has assessed highly sensitive systems and information in a manner that makes it easier for our adversaries, China and Russia, to exploit. DOGE has purged the government of dedicated civil servants, including thousands of national security employees who help collect intelligence and protect our country from terrorist attacks. DOGE has canceled contracts without regard to their purpose, including office leases that enable the Government Accounting Office, Congress's own watchdog, to conduct reviews of national security programs. Musk's DOGE is a national security nightmare that is eroding the federal government's ability to function effectively and efficiently while the price of eggs skyrocket. Let's not forget DOGE's disappearing receipts. Musk's financial savings claims are riddled with math errors, accidentally canceled contracts, and contracts canceled by the Biden administration. If this administration was serious about fighting waste, fraud, and abuse, it would be supporting the legitimate independent agencies that exist for that sole purpose. It's time to end the failed DOGE experiment and restore power to the entities Congress entrusted to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Thanadar. I now recognize the full committee ranking member, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Benny Thompson, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, my Republican colleagues are clearly obsessed with President Biden. They investigated him last Congress and turned up nothing. They tried to impeach him and turned up nothing. And now that he's out of office, they just can't get him out of their heads. Perhaps it's because the Musk-Trump co-presidency and DOGE are unpopular. Musk and DOGE are so unpopular that my Republican colleagues are here today pretending that Joe Biden is still president so that they can have someone to beat up on for their failures. But just in case my colleagues across the aisle don't get it, let me make it clear to you. Republicans are in charge here in the House. Republicans are in charge over in the Senate. Republicans appointed justices who control the Supreme Court. And your orange Jesus is in charge of the White House. Republicans on this committee want to have a hearing to air their grievances about the Biden-Harris administration because under the Trump-Musk administration, planes have been crashing out of the sky, the price of eggs has skyrocketed, tens of thousands of Americans have lost their jobs, and Russia and China are celebrating. If Republicans really want to combat waste, fraud, and abuse, they should be laser focused on overseeing Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, which is a cheap knockoff of congressionally mandated watchdogs. Elon Musk's DOGE not only is redundant, but also is a direct threat to the Homeland Security. It must be stopped. Because Elon Musk's DOGE illegally dismantled USAID, food is rotting in the warehouses instead of feeding starving children overseas. That is waste. It is also a national security risk. Why? Because hungry nations won't go hungry for long. Our global adversary, China, will be right there to feed them, and China won't be there out of the goodness of their heart. Elon Musk laughed during a cabinet meeting as he described how Doge accidentally cut Ebola funding, which is necessary to prevent the ravaging disease from becoming a pandemic and killing people here in the United States. Elon Musk froze Homeland Security grants that Congress authorized to help nonprofits prepare for a terrorist attack. Elon Musk unvetted Doge delinquents have accessed sensitive federal information and fed sensitive data into unsecure artificial intelligence software that China and Russia are sure to exploit. Pursuant to a demand from President Trump, the CIA shared the name of every single person hired at the intelligence agency over the last 2 years. The message went to an unsecured email address at OPM, the same agency that was previously hacked by China. At the same time, the Trump-Musk administration has fired thousands of federal employees, including veterans, people working in national security, and hundreds of DHS employees. Who does that benefit? It surely doesn't make the United States safer. Russian and Chinese spies are targeting recently fired federal workers with security clearances, and I can guarantee you that those foreign spies are targeting the young, inexperienced, those employees who have unfettered access to the federal systems and classification information. The Trump-Musk administration has created a national security nightmare, and my Republican colleagues are sleepwalking right into it. Make no mistake, Elon Musk Doge is a homegrown threat, and it's time for the other side to wake up. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Thompson. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are, as a committee, pleased to have a panel of government witnesses before us today on this important topic. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States of the House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect the witness have answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Mr. Chris Curry is the Director of the Homeland Security and Justice at the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO. Ms. Kristen Bernard is Department of Homeland Security's Deputy Inspector for Audits. Ms. Erica Lang is the Department of Homeland Security's Assistant Inspector General for Inspections and Evaluations. Thank you all as witnesses for being here today. I want to now recognize Mr. Chris Curry for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Thanedar, Ranking Member Thompson. It's an honor to be here today to talk about GAO's work on the Department of Homeland Security. Since 2003, when DHS opened its doors, we've issued thousands of reports and just as many recommendations to improve the department. There's been a lot of progress made over that 20-some-odd years, but there's a huge number of challenges that still remain. I can't cover them all in 5 minutes, but I just want to give you a snapshot of what I see as the biggest priorities. Right now, there's 459 open recommendations that we have to the department, but each year we send a letter to each cabinet secretary outlining those that are the highest priority. Last year, we sent a letter outlining 37 open recommendations to the DHS secretary, and these run across the gamut of the mission of the department. For example, we've recommended they improve their IT procurement and acquisition processes, better training and hiring for Secret Service agents, simplifying disaster assistance, sharing cyber threat information across the department and across agencies, and collecting better data on ICE detainees, just to give an example, a few of them. Each year, we also identify areas of duplication, overlap, and fragmentation and cost savings across the entire federal government. And DHS has been a major part of that too. Since we've been doing that work, we've identified over $19 billion in financial savings that the department could save by making its programs more efficient. And currently there are many other areas, over 30 of them, that have still not been fully addressed by DHS. Just to give a few examples of these, we have recommended that better procuring and streamlining its IT systems could save potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. Closing unnecessary Coast Guard boat stations that overlap with one another could save millions of dollars. And DHS and the FBI could work together to better streamline the sharing and collection of terrorism information, just to name a few. I also want to discuss the DHS high-risk areas that are currently on our list. Every 2 years at the new Congress, GAO issues a high-risk report to Congress. There are currently over 30 issues across the federal government on there, and many that affect DHS. But the two I want to highlight are, one, DHS management at large. This has been on our high-risk list since 2003. It has been narrowed over the years as the department has worked to create itself into one functioning department, but we still face a number of very difficult financial management and IT security issues. For example, every year, DHS's independent auditor identifies access controls and IT security problems with its systems, which clearly, as one of the nation's foremost national security agencies, is a concern. In financial management, DHS has a number of systems, including FEMA and ICE, which manage most of the department's billions of dollars in resources. Some of these are over 25 years old. FEMA itself has 6 different procurement systems that can't talk to one another. And so there are still some legacy challenges that have not been addressed in over 30 years since FEMA was first created. Lastly, and you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, we just added a new area to the high-risk list this year, strengthening the delivery of federal disaster assistance. There are over 30 different federal agencies that are involved in disaster assistance of some kind. And since 2015, we as a federal government have spent close to $500 billion on disaster assistance. There are a number of ways this program and these programs need to be streamlined. They are too complicated. We hear over and over again from survivors and state and local governments that they are too difficult, and oftentimes the assistance they get does not meet the expectation of what they think they're going to get. And then lastly, you mentioned some of the issues about FEMA's the mission workload. FEMA is stretched too thin. They are managing over 600 major disaster declarations, some going back 20 years. They have too much of a workload and they can't keep up with it. They have challenges retaining and hiring the right number of workers with the right skills. And as more and more is being added to their workload, they just get further and further behind. This completes my prepared remarks, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Curry. I now recognize Ms. Kristen Bernard for 5 minutes for opening statement.
Thank you so much. Chairman Brackeen, Ranking Member Tanadar, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today to discuss our oversight work that improves DHS's execution of its mission operations while preventing fraud and abuse in its programs. My testimony today will highlight long-standing and systemic weaknesses that pertain to border security and immigration enforcement, cybersecurity, and emergency management. First, DHS faces challenges executing its day-to-day border security and immigration operations. We've issued numerous reports highlighting recurring problems in tracking and accounting for migrants entering and being released into the country. For example, we recently reported ICE was unable to monitor the location and status of all unaccompanied children once released or transferred from DHS custody. We also reported DHS could not locate migrants once released due to missing or invalid addresses, as well as the reliance on manual ad hoc methods for border apprehension and detention processing. Each of these deficiencies point to the absence of fundamental practices necessary for maintaining operational control of the border. The root cause of these issues stem from DHS's lack of strategic focus for cross-component collaboration. Automation and consistency would better enable CBP and ICE to keep pace with the fluctuating volume of migrants apprehended. Until these issues are addressed, DHS will be unable to maintain awareness of all migrants' locations once released from DHS custody, which may hinder immigration enforcement operations. Second, DHS's inability to consistently secure systems, networks, and data across its 22 components may weaken its overall defense against potential cyber attacks. Our recent audits of access controls, which is an essential cybersecurity practice, revealed hundreds of personnel who had either left DHS or transferred to a new position, but they continued to have access. We also identified hundreds of users with elevated privileges and access. And similarly, our audits of mobile devices identified thousands of prohibited and high-risk applications and thousands of devices that were not adequately secured. And lastly, our recurring testing of critical systems across DHS has revealed hundreds of workstations that were not receiving security patches or operating with the right settings. Collectively, our oversight has identified more than 4,000 security vulnerabilities over the past 3 years. But I will note, our recommendations have prompted swift action by DHS in the area of their cybersecurity posture. They've made continuous improvements and quickly remediated vulnerabilities. And I credit this to our in-house automated testing capabilities and methodologies that enable us to provide results before the audit concludes, as well as to our strong partnership with DHS officials who are responsible for implementing and overseeing cybersecurity practices. Third and finally, I will highlight our continued work to help improve FEMA's administration of disaster programs. While FEMA has certainly faced an unprecedented number of natural disasters and a global pandemic, it continues to operate in a manner that is not conducive to the scale or complexity of its current environment. We continue to identify astronomical amounts of questioned costs, totaling $12 billion in the last 3 years. And earlier this year, in fact, we notified FEMA and Congress of our findings, totaling $7 billion in funds that could have been put to better use due to the delays in closing out disaster programs. The results of our work demonstrate our dedication to promoting the integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness of DHS programs and operations. But we do remain concerned that until the department fully addresses recommendations for improvement, its components may be hindered to achieve these essential mission functions that our national security and prosperity rely upon. DHS OIG remains committed to working with this subcommittee and DHS leadership and other stakeholders to promote transparency, efficiency, and accountability. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss our critical work, and thank you for Congress's support in enhancing our ability to promote accountability and deter fraud against DHS programs and operations. And this concludes my testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Bernard. I now recognize Ms. Erica Lang for her 5 minutes of opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Burkeen, Ranking Member Tanadar, and esteemed members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Office of Inspector General's independent oversight of Homeland Security programs and operations. As you've heard from my colleague, our vital work ensures DHS is effective and efficient while safeguarding American security and taxpayer dollars. My testimony today will focus on my office's oversight of DHS's efforts regarding border security and immigration enforcement. First, I want to highlight OIG's body of work related to the resettlement of approximately 97,000 Afghan evacuees into American communities in 2021. We determined that approximately 11,700 Afghan evacuees independently departed U.S. military bases without assistance from resettlement agencies. Our review found DHS struggled to track who independently departed, and when these independent departures occurred. DHS also did not attempt to locate all evacuees who independently departed the bases to verify their compliance with parole conditions. We also examined DHS's processes for identifying and resolving potentially derogatory records of Afghan parolees and found this process was fragmented. Ultimately, the department did not have a process for monitoring parole expiration for individual Afghan parolees and had not designated a single component to monitor this parole expiration. Finally, we reviewed DHS's overall management of the evacuation efforts. We found the department met processing timelines for the limited number of asylum applicants from the Afghan population. However, it did not have a structure to support DHS volunteers for the effort, and the lack of direct funding and absence of clear authority affected the coordination of the resettlement process. I also want to discuss two key reports that point to specific weaknesses in the department's ability to maintain effective border security. First, in 2022, CBP apprehended and released an alien without providing information requested by the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center that would have confirmed the individual was a positive match for the terrorist watch list. This occurred because of CBP's ineffective processes for resolving inconclusive matches with the watch list. We determined that ICE also faced multiple challenges planning and conducting the alien's arrest. Second, we examined CBP's and ICE's processes for detaining and removing inadmissible travelers from a particular international airport. Between fiscal years 21 and 23, CBP released at least 383 inadmissible travelers from custody at that airport. 44% of them did not return for their removal flight. We found CBP did not have an effective process to track who failed to return for their flights and did not consistently transfer their cases to ICE for removal proceedings. Our findings that I've just shared point to weaknesses in processes, information sharing, resources, and technologies that affect the department's ability to effectively secure its borders and enforce immigration laws. Lastly, we continue to conduct congressionally mandated unannounced inspections of both CBP holding facilities and ICE detention facilities to ensure the facilities comply with federal detention standards. We have issued 16 reports regarding CBP's short-term holding facilities from fiscal year 22 through 24. Our most significant recommendations address meeting national standards for time in custody as well as overcrowding. During the same time, we issued 14 reports related to ICE detention facilities and made multiple recommendations to improve the conditions of those in detention. These unannounced inspections help ensure the department complies with applicable detention standards to maintain the required conditions of detainees in custody and mitigates risks to the health and safety of DHS personnel. As my colleague and I have described, DHS OIG's comprehensive body of work demonstrates our commitment to improving the department's effectiveness in its many mission areas. The independence of inspectors general ensures necessary oversight, accountability, and transparency in the federal government. It allows us to make objective, actionable recommendations. We appreciate Congress's ongoing support of our independent oversight. This concludes my testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Lang. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning our witnesses, and additional rounds of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Curry, starting in 2011, GAO made 83 recommendations. You pointed this out in your opening statement, implicating $19 billion in savings. So from 2011 to date, recommendations from your organization proved $19 billion in savings for the taxpayer. In March of 2025, there remains 459 open recommendations that the GAO has made specific, and you mentioned 37 of those are high priority recommendations, with only 5 of those recommendations for efficiency being implemented. You mentioned the 2 high priority areas, one of which included FEMA, which our president has been talking about. We have members of Congress talking about. To what extent does the high number of recommendations from GAO relative to the Department of Homeland Security 37, two of them specifically, that remain unaddressed implicate major duplications, cost-saving potential?
Yeah, well, definitely all of them relate to streamlining or improving the efficiency, if not directly finding overlapping programs. So certainly you can translate those recommendations that if implemented, you would save millions, if not billions of dollars.
And so I want you to, again, please highlight the two areas specific to this high-risk category, federal government-wide, correct? The two areas specific to this committee's jurisdiction. What are those two areas, again, just its simplicity?
Sure. One is DHS IT security and financial management, also improving the delivery of federal disaster assistance. And actually, there's one more I didn't mention today, which is the cybersecurity of the nation is a high-risk area as well in DHS.
Which OIG is also indicated. So one area that showcases the significant growth, waste, as you just said, is the FEMA's disaster recovery efforts. It is more than justified what our president has been discussing when he's talking about what we can do to change the status quo. So I've asked staff to provide this chart. Visuals are always good. I don't know, we may have to raise that up. Can you all see the red lines from your seated position, the red lines at the bottom? You able to see that? That's the rate of inflation. That is the rate of inflation starting in 2000 at the sidebar here, very, very far left. The dark blue at the bottom is the base for disaster recovery. Then the light blue is the supplementals that Congress comes in and brings about. So the bottom red line represents just the base growth every year appropriated by Congress. The upper red line represents what would be, if we had grown at the rate of inflation, supplementals added. So go back to 2000. At the rate of inflation, what we will see is base disaster aid, annually appropriated, if it had just grown at the rate of inflation, it would be almost two times greater. Bottom left number, $2.5 billion. Today, at the rate of inflation, that base number would be $4.2 billion. That's the bottom red line. You can see, very slow growth. The upper red line, again, indicative of the supplementals. If we go back, middle number on the left side, $4.2 billion in 2000 was the total added in the supplemental cost. If you rise at the rate of inflation, that would put us at $8.2 billion. But you notice where those red lines track on the right side of this graph. Way short of where we actually are. And you have to, instead of a multiplier of 200, you have to put a multiplier of 800%. That is the rate of growth, whether it's the base, 800% growth, relative what would be the rate of inflation, or supplemental 800% growth. And then you see a few years before. I want to dismantle quickly. I don't have the time to go through the stats. I've done this in committee before. Anyone who says this is climate related, more climate, you've got a United Nations climate panel. The United Nations, not known to be right of center, saying that there is no correlation between frequency of hurricanes and drought and wildfires relative to climate change. So that argument, even the United Nations dispels. We've got a waste problem. We've got an inefficiency problem. All right. GAO added improving FEMA's disaster recovery assistance to its high risk. Annual appropriations to that fund have greatly outpaced inflation, as I just showed. Mr. Curry, what does it mean to be on the high risk list, and how that, given the increased appropriations the DRF has continued to receive, what should policymakers be concerned about it when it comes to them remaining on that list, especially given these numbers?
To be on the high-risk list means that the program is vulnerable to waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement or inefficiency. And one of the main reasons we added this to our list this year is, actually, your chart shows FEMA dollars. If you were to add the rest of the federal government, it would go through the ceiling pretty much. So what's happened over time is that this process and this assistance has just gotten too fragmented and too large, and it's just not well coordinated. And we hear this over and over again when we go around the country and talk to survivors and state and local governments. So I think there's just a tremendous amount of efficiency that can be gained by better streamlining these programs.
Thank you. I'm wanted now for his 5 minutes question, recognize Mr. Thanadar. You are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to our guest here. The Inspector Generals play a crucial role in combating waste, fraud, and abuse, and promoting efficiency and effectiveness in government programs and operations. However, they must adhere to integrity, objectivity, and independent standards. Previously, GAO found that a lack of transparency in DHS OIG's selection of work topics called into questions the independence of the organization. What changes, this is a question for Ms. Bernard and Ms. Lang, what changes has the OIG made to ensure transparency when selecting work proposals, and how does the agency ensure it is targeting the highest risk areas at DHS?
Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for recognizing the importance of inspectors general. At DHS OIG, that is very important for us. We always want to make sure we're allocating our resources very wisely, especially recognizing we are overseeing a department with 22 components, over 260,000 employees worldwide. It's very important that we allocate our resources to address the highest risk. So I am really proud of our risk-based approach to make sure we are helping DHS accomplish its most critical mission areas and its most critical challenges. So we do have a recurring and repeatable framework for that. It encourages staff to consider project ideas from multiple sources, internally and externally.
Okay. My question here also is, will you commit that the OIG's audits, evaluations, and investigations of the Trump administration will meet integrity, objectivity, and independent standards and help ensure DHS operates within the law?
Yes, I can assure you we will continue conducting our oversight work in accordance with our statutory authority. We will remain independent and objective, and will continue to follow our auditing standards. And our work continues unabated as we currently are still working under our Inspector General, Dr. Kafari.
Thank you. And my question to Mr. Curry is, for over 100 years, GAO has played a crucial role in enhancing the effectiveness of government programs and ensuring taxpayer money is well spent. Over the past 20 years, GAO work has resulted in about $1.45 trillion in financial benefits and over 30,000 programs and operational benefits. Through its high-risk list, GAO focused attention on the most significant challenges facing the government. One such challenge is human capital, including skills shortage, a challenge DOGE does not seem to appreciate as it purges civil servants. What are the consequences of reducing the federal workforce using a sledgehammer rather than a scalpel?
Well, you're correct. Many of the high-risk areas, and there's over 30 of them across all of the federal government that we've identified, are on the list because of some sort of staffing or capacity challenge. That means that either they don't have the right number of people to perform the mission or they don't have the right skills. So typically, what you do is you figure out what you want the government or the agencies to do and how you want them to do it, and then you figure out what sort of staff you need to do it. So obviously it's going to have some implications, but we don't know yet what exactly those will be.
Thank you. And Ms. Lang, I didn't give you any time to respond, so if you want to take a couple, 30 seconds if you like.
No, thank you. I think my colleague covered everything. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chair, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now would like to recognize the gentleman from Tennessee for his 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Ogles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lang, after the Biden administration's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, Biden offered tens of thousands of Afghans passage into the United States. We all understand the desire to get known trusted partners to the United States, perhaps, safely after withdrawal. But there are also many hostile, violent people in Afghanistan. Did the Biden administration adequately vet Afghans before granting them parole? Ms. Lang.
Thank you for that question. The screening and vetting of Afghan evacuees at the time was a subject of one of our reports. Kristen, I would like to, it was part
Ms.
of my
Bernard,
colleague's
fine.
work.
Sure, yeah, I can take that. We did do an audit in 2022 to look at the screening and vetting of the Afghan withdrawals. We did, in our population, we did find that I believe it was 35 who were allowed to board a flight that hadn't been fully screened. And generally, we found that CBP did not always have accurate and complete data for conducting the screening of those evacuees. In some cases, they were just missing their identification. So, we didn't even have biographic information to screen. Since that time, the department has provided documentation that all of the evacuees have been screened, and that's something that we're still looking at now to validate.
So to be clear, at the time that they were granted parole, we did not have the entire picture of who these individuals were. In some cases, we did not have their identifications. I think it's safe to say that some of the very people that have torn that country apart, some of the very folks from Afghanistan that we might otherwise allow to be here, they allowed the folks they're running from to come with them. This is a disaster. This is a recipe for disaster. And also keep in mind that little event called 9/11 was planned in Afghanistan. So we have folks in this country, that don't like the United States of America. We've seen it on full display for decades now. And the botched withdrawal, the failed policies of the Biden administration, and allowing folks from a hostile nation to come here unvetted makes America less safe. And to be clear, we know that we've let individuals on the terror watch list into this nation. Some through the Parole program, some have walked through our southern border. This is a failure of the Biden administration. Enough is enough. So as you see President Trump going through the process of closing the border, as you see the mechanism where we're deporting individuals, this is our country. These are our borders. If you're not from here, you are a guest, and we get to decide who comes in and who has to leave. And the way forward, as we face the barreling debt this country has in our future, is we get to decide. The average immigrant family that comes here illegally will cost the American taxpayer $1 million. $1 million. Where's that money coming from? It's coming from you. It's coming from me. It's coming from hardworking Americans. And it's time that we do the hard thing, that we admit that the Biden administration, or for that matter, any administration, who allowed folks to be here that shouldn't be here, that we send them home, that we give them the opportunity to go back home. And look, I don't blame anyone for wanting to come here. I have 3 children. My wife and I, we have 3 children. I walk through fire and over glass to give them a better life. But if you want to come to this country, our country, you're going to do it the right way. And you're going to follow our rules and our laws. And if you don't like it, you can leave. And I'm not going to be apologetic for a president or for myself or for my colleagues who understand and respect the rule of law and respect everyone, citizen, non-citizen, guest, illegal. You're going to follow our laws. And if you're here legally, you need to get out. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ranking Member Thompson for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kerr, how long have you been with the GAO?
Be 23 years in June.
I compliment you on that. How long have you been looking at DHS and its programs?
About 22 of those years.
Okay, thank you. So if you looked at DHS at this point and there had to be a reduction in force, what would you expect? How would that process play out?
Well, It's a challenge because there's not a mission in DHS that's not critical, which is very unique. I think it would be hard to balance between, is cybersecurity more important than disaster assistance, and it's not. Each of their missions is critical. So I think that what you'd have to look at is what are the agencies expected to do and what are they expected to deliver? So for example, with FEMA, 100 or more disasters a year, 600 total disasters they're managing. What do our communities and our survivors expect from them? And then what sort of numbers of people do we need to deliver that assistance? And right now, for example, with FEMA, they can't keep their head above water with delivering what we expect them to deliver.
Well, thank you. You mentioned FEMA and what's the other agency? You mentioned two.
I think cybersecurity, CISA.
Okay. So if I told you that there have been hundreds of FEMA employees and CISA employees summarily told to leave without evaluation, without a plan or anything of that nature. Have you seen that?
We know that there have been dismissals of employees. Yes.
So are you aware of any kind of a reduction in force plan or dismissal plan for the employees that are currently being discharged at FEMA or CISA?
I haven't seen any plan like that. I do know that some of these reductions have been based on for newer or probationary employees. That's about the extent of the grouping that I'm aware of.
Well, when you say probationary employees, define that for the committee.
Well, that could be people that are new to FEMA, or it could be people that are new to their particular position.
If I told you that there were employees who've been with the agency for 10 years, got promoted to another position, and all of a sudden they are considered probationary, is that consistent with normal personnel policies and procedures?
Not normally. I'd want to know, where they work and what their actual performance was. That's an important part, their performance every year, and then also what specific area they work in to know whether that is something that would have an impact on the mission or not.
So if I told you there are hundreds of employees at FEMA and CISA who've been discharged, who evaluations say they've been excellent employees.
Yeah, I mean, I would have concerns over that, and not just from the immediate mission, but hiring new employees as well, because whatever reductions are made, there's going to have to be some people, federal employees, that deliver the services. So
Sure.
I'm concerned mostly with FEMA being able to deliver the mission that we expect it to deliver.
Yeah, if I told you that CISA employees have a critical mission, they have to maintain basically our cyber hygiene for government, and that we have people who are being discharged, and now that agency is losing its capacity to do what its mission calls for, that creates a vulnerability by letting those people go. I mean,
Yeah, in the area of cybersecurity, particularly in CISA, we've spent the last 10 years trying to get DHS the authorities it needs to bring on board people with those skill sets, because they don't always want to work for government. They can make a lot more money outside. So with regard to cybersecurity specialists, yes, I'm concerned about losing that talent and then being able to recruit the talent we need to address the threat we face.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the representative from Georgia, Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can assure everyone the threat we face is millions of people that came into our country under the Biden administration and full Democrat control under the past 4 years. In Joe Biden's first few days and months as president and full Democrat control of this country, The Biden administration stopped construction of the border wall, unlawfully granted mass parole. That means he let thousands and thousands of people in this country every single day, expanded the grounds for claiming asylum to pretty much anybody and everyone, implemented catch and release. Oh, if they caught him, they just released them in with here's some paperwork, here's a free flight, here's a bus ticket, and if you make it to New York City, taxpayers in New York and other sanctuary cities will pay for you to stay. He terminated cooperative agreements and took just about every action possible to facilitate the largest invasion of our country and create the highest national security threat in our homeland that our country has ever faced. Ask any angel parent how they feel today about federal workers losing their jobs. You know what they're going to say? They're going to say the United States government failed our family because our child or family member were murdered by an illegal alien that shouldn't have been in this country. Ask Laken Riley's mother how she feels about that. Ms. Bernard and Ms. Lang, in your testimony, you stated that in a 2024 OIG report, CBP could not biometrically confirm the identity of all persons seeking entry in vehicles at land ports of entry, nor did CBP maintain consistency in operational procedures to screen all vehicle passengers prior to allowing these non-citizens into the country. We knew that CBP wasn't verifying the identities of people crossing the border in between ports of entry, but they weren't even able to fully identify people at ports of entry in cars. That would be like us opening up our doors to our house, opening up our windows, and not checking to see who's coming in with our children in our house. You also testified that OIG assessed DHS's actions related to the screening process of suspected terrorists, and in 2022, CBP missed multiple opportunities to verify that an apprehended alien was a positive match for the terrorist watch list before releasing the migrants into the community. Terrorist watch list, ladies and gentlemen. This included not providing information requested by the FBI's Terrorist Screening Center, which would have confirmed a positive match. Ms. Bernard and Ms. Lang, why did these failures occur under the Biden administration? Ms. Bernard.
Yeah, thank you. This is a critical area for us. We've done a lot of work to look at border security, and in that particular project that you mentioned, we were looking specifically at how CBP was conducting screening and vetting at ports of entry. Our focus was on the technological capabilities, resources, and processes that they were using. And yes, we did find challenges in biometric screening capabilities. One was that biometric capabilities are not available at all land border crossing lanes. And the second was that on occasion, they would forego screening passengers. So if there was a backlog of high volume of travelers coming across the port of entry, they may waive the screening of the passenger and only do the driver.
So to increase people coming, let's move the traffic along. Yeah, that's a complete failure. Ms. Lang, can you explain?
I can speak to the release of the individual who was a match for the watch list. We found that happened because of weaknesses that we see across DHS, which is ineffective practices, poor information sharing within CBP itself, staffing constraints on the part of CBP, and really it was paper processes, relying on paper files, moving them across the country. So if these vulnerabilities can be addressed, we did make one recommendation to the department about this particular case, but the recommendation can be used more broadly across their processes.
Right, so these were the policies of the Biden administration, just to be clear. The Democrats had full control, and they allowed millions of people in the country. Mr. Chairman, President Trump and his administration is doing a great job. Tom Homan is leading as border czar and has reduced the crossings from thousands every single day to less than 300. This isn't about resources. This isn't about how many federal employees we have. This is a difference in an election, and this is what the American people voted for: border security and the promises that President Trump made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. The chair now recognizes the representative from Illinois, Ms. Ramirez, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member. You know, it's our first Oversight Subcommittee hearing this Congress, very first one. And I find it really ironic that we're discussing waste, fraud, and abuse when you have an unelected civilian like Musk and Trump who are actually gutting every single tool that DHS has to actually address waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, just think about it. One of the very first actions from this administration that the gentlelady from Georgia loves to brag about, was to fire 17 inspector generals. And since many of my colleagues seem to be confused about the role of an inspector general, well, let me go ahead and remind them. Their mission is to provide objective oversight to promote the economy, efficiency, and effectiveness and integrity of our agencies. Since those firings, the administration has been on a rampage of terminations and fork-in-the-road emails to gut the federal workforce. Their objective, let me be clear, replace impartial, independent federal employees with Musk, it has to be Musk first, Trump loyalists. On top of all that, Trump puts a billionaire who, by the way, gets $8 million a day in government contracts, significant conflict of interest, I'd say, and numerous complaints and open investigations in charge of waste, fraud, and abuse. Come on, y'all. It's the fox guarding the henhouse. And then you add illegal impoundment, funding freezes, extreme budget cuts, and you have a recipe for more abuse. Trump's billionaire friends getting contracts and payouts on the back of working families and veterans that we all represent. So you see how it's hard for me to reconcile that the chaos of illegal firings, the irresponsible handling of conflicts, the defunding of congressionally authorized services is a credible way to approach handling waste, fraud, and abuse. You see, I too want to see an end to the misuse of funding and abuse of our agencies, and especially within Homeland under this secretary. But from where I'm sitting, the biggest culprits of waste, fraud, and abuse are sitting at DOJ and in the White House. So Ms. Bernard and Ms. Ling, do you believe that the Office of Inspector General plays a critical role in safeguarding the agency from waste, from fraud, and abuse? Yes or no? Ms. Bernard?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Ling.
Yes,
Thank you. And my follow-up question, Ms. Bernard and Ms. Ling, I want to ask you, in your opinion, is maintaining a sufficient federal workforce imperative to the success of the agency? Yes or no? Ms. Ling?
Yes.
Ms. Bernard?
Yes.
Ms. Bernard and Ms. Ling, I have another question. Is there a replacement for the Office of Inspector General or an office or department that can do the same work? Yes or no?
No.
Ms. Bernard?
Not that I'm aware of that has the same statutory function, no.
Yeah, I figured you'd say that. The reality is that we need our inspector generals, but this administration overnight sends them an email at 7 p.m. and tells them, you are fired, thank you for your service. This is the same administration that wants to talk about accountability. So I want to pivot quickly to the importance of maintaining a sufficient federal workforce. Mr. Curry, the GAO's testimony states that you found that FEMA had an overall staffing gap of about 35% across different positions at the fiscal year of 2022. What are the possible consequences if DHS does not properly staff up? Instances like disaster recovery and resilience.
Well, quite simply, if the workload remains the same, which I think it will, or increase moving forward, they're not going to have enough people to do the job that they're asked to do right now, unless they are, their mission or their authorities are reduced in some way.
So, Mr. Curry, we here say that we care deeply about the American people, our constituents. I have colleagues here that do everything they can to go after immigrants. But the reality is that this administration here is talking about cuts when we know that we need these funds for disaster recovery and resilience, and not having the workforce actually makes it impossible for us to be able to deliver those services. Let me close by saying this. As a member of this committee, especially this subcommittee, my responsibility is to ensure that we are in fact conducting oversight. And the reality that is that Trump is the president right now, that The Republicans have the House and the Senate, and so therefore we're going to have to do some internal assessment of how you are functioning, and especially today, given the unethical and illegal actions coming from billionaire bosses. Because I'm clear that maintaining independent oversight and accountability tools are critical for the health and success of our agencies and for the American people. And I want that to be on the record. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Representative yields. I would now like to recognize for 5 minutes of questioning the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Knott.
Thank you, Chairman. Witnesses, thank you all for being here. Rather than take up most of the time with speaking, I would love to go in and ask some questions about the previous 4 years and the border disaster that I saw firsthand. I want to start with Ms. Lang. One of the OIG reports under the Biden administration described the screening and the vetting implementation as soiled. Are you familiar with that report or the vetting procedures that seem to have been, I would say, deficient during the previous administration?
I'm going to defer to my colleague, Ms. Bernard.
Ms. Bernard.
Screening and vetting.
If that is referring to our 2023 report, and I'm guessing that it is on port of entry, screening and vetting, yes.
Are you familiar? What led to that conclusion?
So, you know, in that particular report, like I said a moment ago, we were looking at the technology and the processes that CBP and ICE are using at ports of entry. And, you know, one common theme that we see in that report and time again is just the lack of situational awareness. There's a lot of, as Ms. Lang pointed to earlier, there's a lot of manual procedures, data inaccuracies, and other lags in getting information from partners that can just reduce situational awareness. Every land port of entry is different, has different technological capabilities and infrastructure. So,
Is there a system that could have facilitated appropriate screening of 11 million encounters at the border?
I think there's a lot of nuances to that question, but it all goes back to volume, right? And DHS has certainly struggled to keep pace with the volume.
Do you know where the decisions were made to allow or to facilitate the number of illegal immigrants at the border or to admit them? Was that in the White House? Was it the DHS boss? Who made those decisions?
I think that would be a combination of DHS guidance and federal regulations at the time.
Okay. Was there ever any discussion about limiting the number of inflows so that we could vet them more thoroughly?
We wouldn't get involved in those policy decisions at the Inspector General's office. That would be for DHS.
Okay. Ms. Wang, were you familiar with any discussions that went on about limiting the number of people who were coming into the country?
No, I'm not familiar with that. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Curry, in regards to your role in identifying how the department functions most, I would say, with the highest level of functionality, were you aware of any discussions with leadership, the White House under the Biden administration, about limiting the number of illegal immigrants who were coming into the country?
No, sir.
Okay. Were there any concerns that were relayed to the administration about, we have terrorists coming in, we have drug dealers coming in, we have human traffickers coming in. There are people that want to harm this country coming in because it's a sheer volume. We miss some of them. Were those concerns relayed to your superiors and to the folks in the White House?
Well, in our work, I mean, we've certainly done a lot of work over the last 4 to 5 years on CBP's role at the border and the processing, and certainly the influx has had an impact on CBP's mission and the number, for example, the number of staff they need to process all those people. So from that standpoint, we've assessed those aspects of
Can
it.
CBP process 11 million people, known encounters? I mean, I submit there's more than 11 million people that crossed over, but is that a feasible ask to say, CBP, you need to process 11 million people in 4 years?
Well, traditionally, they've been very short-staffed and struggled with hiring, for example. It's been a big problem to meet the numbers they need in general. So it's been a huge challenge.
So is the agency able to facilitate 11 million people coming into the country? Can you facilitate vetting? Can you know with confidence these people are not a threat to the country?
Well, honestly, I'm not sure about the exact number of 11 million and what they could do. I can just tell you that based on our work, that we know that they've struggled to meet their mission for a long time and hire the number of people they need in regular times, let alone when there's a surge.
In regards to the number of employees that you think CBP needs to secure the border and to effectively protect the homeland, how many more people do you think you need?
I don't have the exact hiring targets at the tip of my tongue right now. CBP does set a target of what they need, and I know that they've had challenges meeting that and hiring enough agents. We've done a lot of work on that. Part of the problem is the process.
Yep.
It's like a multi-year process.
To hire somebody?
Yeah, at CBP, it's particularly challenging, and that's been something DHS has been trying to address for quite some time.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlemen,
I got that.
if it's okay with the committee, can he ask a follow-up?
Yes. A few extra questions?
Yes.
In regards to the going to the portion of disaster relief to the states, Mr. Curry, is there anything that GAO can do to assist the President's Council in terms of research on returning power to the states and disaster recovery? He's mentioned block grants. He's mentioned giving money more efficiently to the states. Is that something that you would have interest in doing? And if so, what kind of recommendations would you give us to assist in that regard?
Yeah, we haven't been contacted by the council yet, but we've been reporting on this for a number of years. We did a report a couple years ago. We had 10 major options for reforming this system, which, by the way, has been a problem for many years.
When you say this system, what?
The disaster recovery system. I call it the system because it's 30 federal agencies, including FEMA. It's this big, large bureaucratic sort of soup of agencies that all provide assistance. And what we've found over the years is that it's too complicated is the bottom line. And so we have a number of options we've laid out. For example, one is federal government providing less assistance and getting involved and maybe not getting involved in the medium and smaller disasters and letting the states manage those. Another is changing the grant structure. Right now we have FEMA's grants are some of the most complicated in all of government. Like I said, some of these disasters are 20 years old. Hurricane Katrina is still an open disaster. FEMA is still writing checks and obligating funds for Hurricane Katrina. So getting out of the business of that so they can focus on response near term is another option. So, but there's many other options too.
Is one of the perverse incentives of FEMA and your department is, I would think, is it disincentivizes states and local governments from having their own types of creativity or outlets in terms of dealing with disasters. Is that
Absolutely.
fair?
I mean, they know they can rely on the federal government. For example, a few years ago, we looked at states, how many states have a rainy day fund for disasters, and very few do, because they told us outright that if something is bad, then they'll have the federal government pay for it. So,
Right.
For sure.
I'll just go down the list. If you all have any suggestions about how to more efficiently and effectively respond, I'd love to hear it from you, Ms. Bernard or Ms. Lang.
I would just add to what Mr. Curry said. There is a lot of bureaucracy in FEMA, and something that we've seen over not just the last 4 years, but certainly in the 20 years I've been here, is FEMA really struggles with operational efficiency. There are a lot of partners involved, and they also struggle with just making sure that they're collecting sufficient documentation. It's a heroic effort to review just the sheer volume of transactions that they're dealing with. And so they have a lot of different options for reviewing payments as they go along or reviewing a sample of payments. And that's just something we see time and again. It's the more transactions they're dealing with, the more opportunities there are for potential fraud or just misspent funds.
And what's the source of the inefficiency? Is it the workload? Is it the workforce? Is it the process?
I think it's definitely all three. Yes, all three.
Mr. Chairman, I think my time's up. I yield back.
Mr. Chair,
I think the gentleman, go ahead.
I would like to ask for unanimous consent to enter a statement for the record from the Council of Inspector General on integrity and efficiency that speaks to the value of the IG community.
Without objection, so ordered. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony. Members, for your questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses. We ask the witnesses to respond in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be open for 10 days. The witnesses are dismissed, and the committee will be in recess for 5 minutes.
Welcome to Right Side Broadcasting Network, your trusted conservative news outlet. At RSBN, we deliver the truth when the mainstream media falls short. Since 2015, we've proudly broadcasted every single one of President Trump's iconic MAGA rallies, bringing you the excitement and energy live before anyone else. By watching RSBN, you get an unfiltered front row view of the action on the ground. We interview the crowds to give a voice to millions of Americans just like you. We show you President Trump's speeches in their entirety, free from interruptions and censorship. We cover the stories that matter to you with the integrity and passion you deserve. Thank you for choosing RSBN as your home for America First News. Together, we stand strong, united, and informed, so join us and be part of the right side of history.
Parents, do your kids know what courage really means? It's about standing up for America even when there's a target on your back. That's why Mike Huckabee's team created the Kids Guide to the Courage of the President. This important guide tells kids everything they need to know about President Trump's unwavering courage, and you can get it for free. With your free order, you'll receive free bonus gifts, including the Kids Guide to President Trump and a Christmas ornament commemorating Trump's call for us to fight. Get it all for free at freetrumpbook.com. That's freetrumpbook.com.
Hey y'all, it's Silk from the Diamond and Silk Chit Chat Live Show. Look, don't forget to check me out right here on RSBN Network. Be sure to watch the show on Right Side Broadcasting Network, and I want you to support Right Side Broadcasting Network. Yes, it's imperative that you do so, okay? I look to see y'all soon. Bye-bye.
I hear every day about the products you all wish MyPillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard MyPillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use MyPillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all MyPillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard MyPillows absolutely free.
other legal precedents. So the government can claim, hey, we didn't remove any of this content, Facebook did it. And then Facebook in turn can say, well, we have protections under Section 230 and other versions of the law, and then there's no legal recourse for the censored party there either. And this is exactly what happened last year in Murphy v. Missouri when the Supreme Court upheld the dismissal of censored Americans' lawsuits because they supposedly did not have standing. So members, misinterpreting statutes and finding legal loopholes to avoid the protections given to all Americans under the First Amendment is abuse.
You and I share a commonality there, right? Tough last names. Mr. Mike Howell is the Executive Director of the Oversight Project at Heritage Foundation. Mr. John Roth is a former Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Andrew Block is a Senior Counsel at the America First Legal Foundation. I thank all of you as witnesses for being here today, and I value your time. I now recognize Mr. Curtis Shuby for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Chairman, Ranking Member, and to the members of this committee, thank you for having me here today. My name is Curtis Shuby. I am the Executive Director of Council to Modernize Governance. We are a nonprofit, and our overall mission is to reduce the power of the administrative state and ultimately return that power back to both Congress and the people. I'm here today to talk about internet censorship and Homeland Security's involvement in it. Now, the overarching principle that I'd like this committee to keep in mind today as I speak is this: the answer to wrong speech is more speech, not less. Giving government the power to determine what is true and what is not, and the power to determine what narratives can be spoken and what cannot, and giving the power to silence the dissenting voice is opening the door to tyranny. Now, I submitted some written testimony for this committee. I'd like to just give some of the highlights. We all remember back in 2020, election and COVID-related content was routinely marked as misinformation or malinformation or disinformation on social media. Sometimes it was given that little moniker saying that this is disinformation. Sometimes it was deleted, and sometimes the person who spoke even was removed from social media. Now, in a time when 54% of Americans say at least sometimes they get their news from social media, this is a very significant development. It means that some messages are able to get to a significant portion of the American populace, and some messages are not. Now, we've come to find out that there were specific NGOs who were driving this effort. They had determined what messages were constituted MDM, misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation, and they would funnel that off into social media companies who would in turn delete that content. We've also come to find out that some government employees were involved in that during 2020, but as far as we can tell, leadership was not until President Biden took over. So I want to talk about CISA, which we think was one of the more abusive sub-agencies within this effort. So what CISA did, it was created in 2018. It was created to oversee the American infrastructure with regard to cybersecurity. But it took the term that was given in the statutory mandate, quote, critical infrastructure, and took that to mean cognitive infrastructure. So something that was meant for us, the US government, to oversee the tangible elements of our cybersecurity, they took that to mean it can censor American thought. Now, if CISA had begun to itself routinely identify content and report it itself, the American public would have had an outcry because we intuitively know that that would violate the First Amendment. What it did instead is it begun to fund these NGOs that had been driving this effort in the form of grants. The plan was to have the NGOs do the dirty work. The NGO would be the one to identify the content. The NGO would be the one to contact social media, and the government would have less of a hand in it. CISA spent a lot of money in this endeavor. The Center for Internet Security, for example, received $107 million in DHS grants in the last 3 years. Other parts of the Department of Homeland Security, like FEMA, were also involved in these type of efforts. And this is all by design. Again, the government knows that social media has protections under Section 230 and other legal precedents. So the government can claim, hey, we didn't remove any of this content, Facebook did it. And then Facebook in turn can say, well, we have protections under Section 230 and other versions of the law, and then there's no legal recourse for the censored party there either. And this is exactly what happened last year in Murphy v. Missouri when the Supreme Court upheld the dismissal of censored Americans' lawsuits because they supposedly did not have standing. So members, misinterpreting statutes and finding legal loopholes to avoid the protections given to all Americans under the First Amendment is abuse. Funding that effort is waste. The government knows that it should not and cannot censor the speech of American citizens. So under President Biden's leadership, it found that loophole, and this must be fixed. And unfortunately, there are some opportunities for Congress to fix this. It could pass laws that better define what the term critical infrastructure is to keep CISA under control. It can also pass laws that would prevent any government funding of an NGO or other private party who was involved in censorship efforts. And third, it can pass a law that would give citizens standing to have legal recourse when the types of activities described here and today were to occur. Thank you for having me today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Shuby. I now recognize Mr. Mike Howell for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify about the role of NGOs or non-governmental organizations in facilitating mass illegal immigration. I currently serve as the executive director of the Oversight Project and previously was at DHS and on Capitol Hill conducting oversight of immigration matters. The United States of America is still reeling from the worst border invasion in its history. This was an invasion that was planned, promoted, encouraged, funded, and sustained by radical elements of the previous administration. But this invasion could not have been accomplished without a colossal partnership with the NGO community. Simply put, the government just did not have the capacity to get this many people in and around the country without the support of the nonprofits. And to that end, they gave them almost $6 billion to a conglomerate of UN agencies and over 200 NGOs to do just that, according to statistics from the Center for Immigration Studies. The result was that Border Patrol became a daycare. They became Uber drivers just to shuttle illegals to the nonprofits to get them around the country. Now, the Oversight Project has led the way in exposing what I call this border industrial complex. In December of 2022, we did the first of its kind study where we tracked illegal aliens by their cell phones as they went through these nonprofits at the border. In just a 1-month period, in tracking 30,000 devices, so a very small subset of the 10 million that Biden had crossed the border, we found out that the illegals went to nearly every single congressional district in the United States. We proved that every town was indeed a border town. That work informed the House of Representatives to pass H.R. 2, which notably contained a provision defunding the entirety of these NGOs. Now, this was a landmark event. It was controversial even amongst politicians here in D.C. because the dirty secret is a lot of politicians have a very cozy relationship with these organizations. In fact, one member went as far to say that that provision in H.R. 2 was unchristian. Well, that's now a common sense principle for immigration policy today, that we do not fund our own invasion. And to that end, DHS pausing all money to these organizations is simply common sense. Now, really quickly on H.R. 2, because there's been a lot of confusion on this point. Some of your colleagues last Congress over in the Senate introduced a bill to undercut H.R. 2 that would have mandated a new normal of illegal boarding crossings at over 5,000 a day. Now, I'm going to quote President Trump here from his State of the Union last week. People kept saying we needed new legislation to secure the border, but it turned out all we needed is a new president. He was right. He is right. In addition, the Oversight Project continues to lead the way in uncovering seedy behavior after behavior at NGOs. In New York, we found illegal aliens getting false residing documents. In Mexico, we found flyers at an illegal alien staging camp encouraging illegals to vote for Biden. In Arizona, we found a former Mexican consulate official at the Southside Worker Center in Tucson advising illegals how to lie to law enforcement and evade ICE. That's against the law. Additionally, we produced documentary evidence of non-citizens admitting on camera to being registered to vote in Georgia, North Carolina, Minnesota, Arizona. So where are all the government investigations? I am begging for someone to please join us. What about the DHS OIG? I see investigation after investigation into the conditions at ICE facilities. Where are the investigations of these nonprofits and the $6 billion that flowed through them? It's time that we start treating the Biden border crisis like the crime scene that it is. Now, this body funded it. I know a lot of members here want nothing to do with it, but the money came from Congress to fund the Biden border invasion. And so this body retains a responsibility and luckily the authority to figure out exactly how that money was spent and where these illegals ended up. And what NGOs, like the ones that helped facilitate the travel of Jose Ibarra, where he ended up killing Lake and Riley, what taxpayer dollars were involved in that? And one thing I want to leave you with, perhaps most importantly, is the left designed a sophisticated infrastructure to get this many people in the country. You all can do the same thing to get them out. I'm encouraging you to look at all available funding streams to help work with people outside the government to educate illegals on how to leave, to help arrange or even pay for their travel home. I call this whole concept homeward bound. People need to go home. It's time for a modernization of the immigration enforcement system writ large. This means we don't need to secure the border for just 2025, but forever. A renaissance in applying technology and scientific advancements. The stovepipe system of various federal agencies holding this data needs to be fixed. This is what Border Czar Tom Homan called for just a few weeks ago. And generally, we should give Tom Homan exactly what he needs to get this job done. And finally, we got to prepare for the cartels to fight back. These people made a lot of money and gained a lot of power during the Biden administration, and they're not going to take this lying down. We need to get ready for when they start launching drones, kinetic attacks, other asymmetrical warfare. They are not going to go quietly in the night. With that, I thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering all your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. I now recognize Mr. John Roth for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. My testimony is going to focus on the crucial role of the Inspector Generals they play in fighting waste, fraud, and abuse, and the need for a sustained and thoughtful effort to identify and root out waste, and the false economy of large-scale, indiscriminate personnel reductions. Since their creation, IGs have played a vital role in improving government operations, saving the taxpayers billions of dollars, and ensuring that agencies operate within the law. IG offices actually save more money than they spend. For example, in 2023 alone, IG offices identified over $93 billion in potential savings. These savings represent a 26-to-1 return on investments for IGs. This is possible because IGs and their staff have the training and experience in audits, inspections, and investigations, are bound by their professional standards to be independent of the programs and operations they review, to make conclusions and recommendations only when well-founded and supported by the evidence, and to approach their job with the professional skepticism inherent in an auditor. They ask the difficult questions, they challenge their organizations to be better, to be more efficient, to ensure rigor in government operations, and look to eliminate waste, but they are often the bearers of bad news. Recent events have called into question the independence of these IGs. The unprecedented removal of multiple IGs has sent a chilling message to the oversight community. Produce findings that are uncomfortable or politically sensitive, and you risk losing your job. This undermines the entire system of government accountability. These actions create an implicit pressure to avoid the kinds of work necessary for effective government and can lead to self-censorship. Even worse, it destroys the public and congressional confidence in the integrity, the accuracy, and the independence of findings that the IG does make. I applaud the administration's interest in combating waste, fraud, and abuse in government. My career was dedicated to exactly that proposition. But I believe that the administration has missed the mark in relying on the Department of Government Efficiency to identify and root out waste, rather than the mechanism that already exists, the Inspector General community. IG offices are well positioned to understand the specific operational challenges and risks within their agency. If the intent is to cut with a scalpel rather than a hatchet, the deep knowledge of the institution involved is necessary. Moreover, IGs are accountable both to Congress, this body, as well as the general public. IGs are required to submit written reports to Congress detailing their findings and recommendations, which are published, ensuring transparency and accountability. IG staff meets with congressional staff to discuss reports and recommendations. They also initiate reviews based on recommendations from this committee and other committees of government operations. IGs testify before Congress, as we saw today, to explain their findings and answer Congress's questions. And congressional appropriators routinely cite IG reports in their own reports, directing agencies to fix problems that the IGs have uncovered. Because an IG's findings and recommendations are credible specifically because they are the result of a rigorous, professional, and transparent process. No ad hoc process, no matter how well-intentioned, will garner the same level of credibility and trust. With regard to the reductions in federal workforce that's currently going on, intuitively it makes sense that reducing the federal workforce may save money, but in reality, I think the actions will be unlikely to do so. Any reductions in force should be part of a well-thought-out management plan that aligns agency resources and priorities and mission requirements with the workforce necessary to carry them out. To do so otherwise will drain the agency of specific skills necessary to ensure that the agency performs its mission. Moreover, creating a climate of fear and uncertainty in the government workforce simply drives out high-quality employees, those with the necessary skills and the record of performance, out of the federal government. Finally, any reduction in force must comply with the laws that Congress has enacted and be decided by those without conflict of interest and avoid prohibited personnel practices. Failure to do so results in wasteful and time-consuming litigation, allegations of improper motive, and loss of agency focus in dealing with the fallout from such actions. This concludes my testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roth. Mr. Block, you are now recognized to make your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today on the Biden administration's waste, fraud, and abuse at the Department of Homeland Security. We at America First Legal have spent the last 4 years educating the American public on this topic, and I'm honored to share some of our findings and results with you. The Biden administration's cavalier attitude towards the law was on full display in the way that it approached immigration policy, where, at the direction of President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas, DHS failed to faithfully execute the laws and even actively created barriers to law enforcement. Among the administration's many abuses, none is worse, in my view, than its abuse of the parole authority. Congress empowered the executive branch to use its discretion on a case-by-case basis in compelling exigent circumstances to temporarily admit otherwise inadmissible aliens when doing so is necessary for an urgent humanitarian reason or a significant public benefit. Yet from this limited, qualified, and individualized authority of last resort, the Biden administration created whole programs completely disregarding all of the constraints imposed by Congress and using it as a primary authority to indiscriminately admit millions of people. One of these programs was the CBP One app. Now, when you or I arrive at a border or a port of entry, we have to show our documents, whether it's a passport, a driver's license, a visa, or some other document showing that we are entitled to enter the country. But with the CBP One app, the last administration said, forget all of that. And illegal aliens, lacking any basis or authority under the law to enter the country, were allowed to make an appointment, show up at a port of entry, and walk in the front door. It wasn't even catch and release, as Ms. Taylor Greene said. It was literally show up and walk in. According to Secretary Noem, more than 1 million people entered the country this way. AFL applauds DHS's announcement yesterday that going forward, they're going to repurpose this app for their removal efforts. Other parole programs, which I touch on in my more detail in my written testimony, are the CHNV, a program so rife with fraud that the administration actually paused it of its own volition for nearly a month, and the Parole in Place. Now, Parole in Place was particularly egregious, and AFL took the administration to court and won, stopping this program in its tracks. Through these 3 parole programs, the last administration attempted to bestow legal status on 2.6 million illegal aliens. For context, that is more than the population of 15 U.S. states and the equivalent of the population of the United States' 3rd largest city of Chicago. And where the Biden administration could not make an argument under existing law, it simply endeavored to rewrite the law. One such example is the 2022 Asylum Officer Rule, which gave USCIS asylum officers the duties of immigration judges, leading to AFL founder and president Stephen Miller at the time calling it the most extreme immigration regulation ever proposed. Last, is the issue of interior enforcement. And while removals were statistically non-existent during the Biden administration, its attitude towards ICE was even more pernicious than that. Under the Biden administration, DHS implemented policies that proactively made it harder for ICE agents to take the routine enforcement actions against the worst of the worst. Under the ironically named priorities memo, for example, DHS required ICE agents to seek pre-approval from Washington, D.C. headquarters for every proposed enforcement action for almost all of 2021. Records obtained by AFL show how ridiculous this policy was, resulting in nearly 60,000 requests by field agents to do their job. This is 60,000 enforcement actions against gang members, cartel members, murderers, arsonists, traffickers, rapists, and violent individuals that were slowed down or delayed because trained ICE enforcement officers had to go to a desk, write out a justification, and get pre-approval from DC to do their job. The story of the Biden administration's DHS cannot be told without emphasizing just how wasteful and abusive its policies were of taxpayer resources. From willfully ignoring the law, to attempting to rewrite it, to actively erecting roadblocks to block law enforcement, every Biden-era DHS immigration policy can be categorized as waste, fraud, or abuse. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. Additional rounds of questioning may be called for. All members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Howell, you encouraged Congress just a minute ago relative to the NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and what we could do in particular to having the Office of Inspector Generals look into the NGOs. I really am intrigued by that because I think it's something that committees are going to be lacking on if we don't do that. I think it's a great idea. So I'm going to take your idea. I'm going to pivot to a former lead official within the Office of Inspector General, Mr. Roth. How would Congress be able to approach the Office of Inspector Generals to be able to do the granular element of trying to find how the NGOs, we know we have an issue of financial management, which it came up minimal in the previous panel, where we're under Homeland Security, financial management of controls, of tracking monies. What did you see? What can we do, in your estimation, quickly, to be able to accomplish this goal for accountability with these NGOs?
Well, in my experience, IG's offices are extraordinarily sensitive to requests from their committees of jurisdiction. So the fact that you are the chair of a subcommittee of Homeland Security means that typically, or at least in my experience when I was IG, we would take that very, very seriously. So my advice, for what it's worth, is that I would have your staff call their staff, engage in some discussions, and then perhaps follow up with a formal recommendation or a formal request as to the sort of scope of the work.
And in terms of NGOs and their ability to, given the financial management element, we know that we're under high risk under Homeland Security right now. Were you able to find things within NGO funding after it had been let to the NGOs that were on your radar screen when you were a part of the Inspector General's office?
Not in the immigration context, we weren't.
Okay.
And, I am unfamiliar with the source of this funding to the NGOs, whether it was like a Department of Homeland Security grant or some other federal agency. Obviously, we'd only have jurisdiction over, that is, my old office would only have jurisdiction over sort of a Homeland Security grant.
So I want to pivot back to you, Mr. Howell, because you're adding these NGOs into what you call the border industrial complex. And you mentioned that $6 billion were spent under the Biden administration that was specific to the NGOs. Did I understand you correctly on that?
Yes.
And that there are 230 different NGOs involved. Can you name 5? You don't have to do 5. Okay, but a number of NGOs, just right offhand, that you feel like were the most egregious offenders?
Right, so at DHS, there used to be a board that kind of oversaw the distribution of the funding, and on that board sat some of, we'll call them the name brand national charities, and those would include people like, Catholic Relief Services or Catholic Charities, USCCB, one variation of that, Lutheran Relief Services, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, all of these kind of mega organizations that play in the disaster space sat on that board that distributed money through a web of nonprofits. And I'm sure the number far exceeds 230, but there's a reason why the left did it this way. It's so that you couldn't get at who actually ended up with the money and how they spent it. It is doing the government's work outside of government to evade this type of oversight. And so I'd encourage you guys not to rely on the IG community, who has not shown an interest at all in this $6 billion, who sat by and watched the worst border crisis in history happen in front of them, but to go get the information yourself, which is your constitutional duty with your subpoena power to these nonprofits. Make them turn over financial documents, records of illegals, have them answer questions, and so forth.
So you mentioned, though, engaging the inspector generals in this process. So in addition to what you just laid out, how would you see engaging the IG's office in this effort?
Yes, frankly, I don't think they're going to be that willing of a partner because they haven't shown an interest in the border crisis over the last 4 years. I think it's certainly worthwhile to ask, but I don't think Congress should absolve themselves of the constitutional responsibility by a request to the IG. I'd even be looking at law enforcement. A lot of this activity borders on criminal.
It's good. It came up, Mr. Shuby, a minute ago. You got 30 seconds between you and I about NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and how they were the ones that, under the ability of what was supposed to be a network of information protection, stop our electric grid from being taken down, they were farming out internet policing to these NGOs. You got 15 seconds. What would you want to say in terms of what we can do to get to the bottom of that in the process?
You know, I didn't mention this in my remarks, but I think the same suggestion. I think the IG community or DOJ could look into which NGOs were benefiting from this financially and what they were doing with that money.
Thank you all very much. With that, we'll open it up to Mr. Thanadar for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses here for your testimony. Mr. Roth, I thank you for your service. Earlier today, we heard from the GAO and the DHS Office of IG about their work rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. These offices were created by Congress and have legal authority to audit the federal government, as you know. The Trump-Musk administration and House Republicans claim they want to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. So does it make sense to you, Mr. Roth, that one of the first things the new administration did was fire almost every inspector general?
Firing the inspector generals was a disempowering act. It sent the very clear message that if you have a politically sensitive audit or investigation or review, bad news is not welcome in this administration. And what it has done is sent a chilling effect throughout the oversight community, and that's including the Inspector General's office, but also the Office of Special Counsel, Office of Government Ethics, that they are unwelcome and that oversight is not apparently welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Roth, how does Elon Musk's DOJ differ from the statutory watchdogs Congress created who have a long history of rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse?
So one of the primary ways that it's different is the decentralized nature of the OIGs. So each OIG is harbored within a specific department. So for example, for me, it was the Department of Homeland Security. Someone else, it would be NASA. What that gives you is the opportunity to get deep knowledge as to the functions and missions of each agency, sort of the pluses and the minuses, so that you can then go and direct audits, investigations, inspections. The other thing that the IG's office brings that DOJ can't bring is the kind of rigor that professional auditing does. And you saw a demonstration of that today in the first panel with the IG's office, who is very well informed, had written reports that were vetted and according to accounting and auditing standards. You don't have any of that with an ad hoc group that isn't bound by the same kind of professional auditing standards.
Mr. Roth, you were the Inspector General for DHS for a number of years. and you work closely with other statutory watchdogs created by Congress to protect the American taxpayer. Offices like GAO and the offices of special counsel. Based on your experience, why is independence such a critical feature for the Office of Inspector General? And how does that differ from the people at DOJ?
So there's two answers to that question. One is sort of the ability to gain information from the agency in which you are sort of doing oversight on. So if you were perceived of as independent and neutral, you're more willing to get whistleblowers to come in and talk about, and this is really the lifeblood of any oversight, is to be able to get people to trust you and talk about sort of what it is that they see. And during my tenure at DHS, we had a number of whistleblowers in different places because I was perceived as being on nobody's side. I wasn't part of the administration. I wasn't part of the non-administration. Likewise, the Office of Special Counsel has special programs in place to protect whistleblowers. So that's one aspect of it, is that people trust you and they'll come to you so you can root out problems. The second aspect, of course, is just credibility. So when the IG or the Office of Special Counsel writes a report, the fact that they don't have a dog in this fight, the fact that they aren't part of the management, that they're not encumbered by any financial conflicts of interest or other kind of political conflicts of interest, makes those reports more credible than otherwise would be.
Thank you for that. And it is, disturbing because we don't see the same level of competence. Again, do you see the same level of competence or the independence in the 19-year-olds and the 20-year-olds that are hired? Or if you look at their social media profile, you see all kinds of racism and other horrible background. Are these people qualified to do the job that they've been assigned to?
Again, the process that the Inspector General's offices have is that you have to have professional auditors who are trained and skilled in the kinds of things that auditors do. They are reviewed, they are supervised, any report goes through vetting, et cetera.
All right, my time is up, so I yield back, Chair.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the representative from Illinois, Ms. Ramirez, for her 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to also stay for the second panel. At our first Homeland Security Full Committee hearing a couple of weeks ago, I brought this graphic with me. And as you read here, Elon Musk. That is what I believe to my core is the biggest threat to our national security. This is the Committee on Homeland. And since then, I've asked the members of this committee, who is supposed to do everything in their power to protect the homeland, to really take seriously the threat that Trump, Musk, and his army of unaccountable tech bros represent every day. So you can imagine my disappointment, not really, to see that instead, the Republicans on the subcommittee have decided to throw their Lord and Savior a parade in the form of a hearing. And while their Lord and Savior changes from time to time, yesterday it was Donald Trump, today is Musk, tomorrow might be the next billionaire, although this guy is about to become a trillionaire off the backs of working people. It's something that's very clear for me is that Republicans have willingly given away their power to conduct oversight over our agencies and the dangers that these unelected billionaires have on our security. So you see, my Republican colleagues and their hyper-partisan witnesses sitting here today have completely ignored that the waste in our agencies is the millions of dollars spent on the DOJ army of unqualified workers stealing our data and firing dedicated, qualified public servants. The fraud in our government is Elon Musk, whose greatest achievement on efficiency is a social media platform that crashed multiple times yesterday. The abuse is in our nation is a power grab with which Donald Trump imposes his authoritarian agenda. They don't have any legal authority to take sledgehammers to the services and programs that working people depend on, and by the way, Congress authorized. we authorized, but Republicans have allowed it to happen anyway. So, Mr. Roth, I want to ask you the questions today. As DHS's former Inspector General, could you share with us what are the potential threats posed by an unvetted DOJ employee with little to no government experience plugging into DHS's information systems and databases?
So I can't talk about the specifics of exactly what DOJ is doing because obviously I'm not involved any longer in the government. But I will tell you that the IT systems within DHS and really across the government, according to the DHS's reviews of those, are extraordinarily sensitive, are being targeted by foreign adversaries in a way that is not represented in private networks, for example. And you heard the testimony of the GAO witness on the first panel talking about the vulnerabilities that exist, the documented vulnerabilities that exist in access controls. So having an unknown person or an unvetted person have access in ways that you don't have a full understanding of is extraordinarily dangerous and represents a significant vulnerability in IT systems.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. And I think in part, when you said you're not quite sure what their authority or what they're doing is, I think it's actually the concern that a number of us have here. I've said this in Veteran Affairs Committee, and I'm going to say it here. I want to know, what does DOJ have access to? Who authorized it? Who are they talking to? What data do they have? How is it that they can have sensitive data to our national security and that it go completely unchecked? This committee, this subcommittee specifically, is responsible for oversight, accountability, and investigation. And we've already seen the effects of having unqualified people accessing our data and making decisions in our agency. Because look, the day after the DOJ's website was launched, it suffered a security breach, putting our sensitive data in the hands of anyone with a computer and access to the internet. And how can we forget when DOJ fired more than 300 staffers from the National Nuclear Security Administration? Yeah, that's the agency that's tasked with managing the nation's nuclear stockpile. Or the several employees who are working on the federal government's response to H5N1 avian flu outbreak. DOJ doesn't have a great track record, and whether it's due to stupidity or hatred, at this point, a better name for DOJ would be the Department of Obstruction and Gross Errors. I really hope that this committee takes the threat of DOJ and Elon Musk seriously, and I intend to work with all of my colleagues to do that. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Lady yields. I now would like to recognize for his 5 minutes of question the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Howell, your organization published findings from your analysis of cell phone data revealing potential illicit activities by NGOs, such as providing false residency documents or advising illegal immigrants to lie to law enforcement to evade ICE. After the release of your findings, did the Biden administration take any steps to address these concerns? How did they respond to your research and your implications?
So the Biden administration, through the Biden campaign, called me and my organization some variant of disinformation, of course, and then otherwise relied on their legacy media outlets to try to come after us and discredit us, which they ultimately failed and actually ended up supporting our findings.
Thank you. How do you think the administration's failure to act on this issue might have emboldened other NGOs or other groups engaged in questionable practices?
Well, they turned on the fire hydrant of billions of dollars of funding. They built an entire sophisticated apparatus and infrastructure. A lot of people gained a lot of power, influence, and money throughout this, and it resulted in the biggest invasion of the United States, the biggest mass movement of human beings I can think of in an organized fashion throughout our country and into everyone here's community, with drugs, crime, violence, all coming with it.
Mr. Howell, in your testimony, you alluded to examples of NGOs misusing taxpayer-funded grants or resources to facilitate fraudulent activities. Can you elaborate on how these funds were directly misused and what measures can be implemented to trace and prevent further misuse of public funds?
Right. So the behavior we see at the NGOs ranges across the gamut of questionable and even illegal activity, including advising illegal aliens on how to evade ICE. I believe it construes kind of harboring illegal aliens too. It potentially implicates the trafficking of them as well. There's all amounts of kind of criminal negligence I think we can find at these nonprofits. In addition, in New York, we found them giving false residency documents to illegal aliens. Who knows the impact that has in our voting systems?
Did you know of any NGOs that were helping people try to register to vote?
Yes, absolutely. By giving them false residency documents, with residency being one component of voting, that is a factor there. Also, south of the border in Mexico, we discovered flyers encouraging illegals to vote for Biden when they entered the country. Separate, the White House themselves, when they tried the federal takeover of elections via Executive Order 14019, they invited a lot of these nonprofits and their partner organizations to basically advise, we don't need to do anything to warn illegals not to vote whatsoever. They kept the system wide open because they were relying on those very votes. That's why they opened the border in the first place. They can't win with only American votes. They needed to import a new population dependent on government to fundamentally change the United States. That's what this is all about.
You're spot on. Switching gears, American First Legal has been dedicated to ensuring transparency and holding the government accountable. However, these efforts have faced significant obstacles, particularly from actions within the Biden administration aimed at hindering oversight work. Mr. Block, can you share some examples of how individuals within the Biden administration have attempted to obstruct America First legal efforts to hold the government accountable and promote transparency?
Yeah, so a couple that come to mind. I mean, from day one, the Department of Justice moved to disqualify one of our co-founders and general counsel, Gene Hamilton, from cases that he was qualified to work on and had every right to be on. And that was day one to all the way up through to just before the election. NARA was supposed to produce documents depicting Hunter Biden and Joe Biden meeting President Xi. Those were ultimately produced after the election. There were other productions that we were supposed to get before the election that came after the election as well. So, I mean, just from day one through the current day.
Thank you, Mr. Block. Mr. Chairman, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, I walked in and I heard the word hyper-partisan. I'm telling you right now, I hate that I was committed to something else and I couldn't be here longer. I want to defend these folks. 2 of the 3 Republican folks that are testifying today have served with distinguished records for years for DHS, and they've been called hyper-partisan. What this committee wants is the facts. We want to know what worked. We want to know what didn't work. I thank you for your service, and I hope that that hyper-partisan statement doesn't affect anything you do in your future. Thank you for your service to our country.
Gentleman yields. I thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses. We ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing pursuant to Committee Rule 7E. The hearing record will be open for 10 days. I do want to just make a general statement relative to the actions of the administration, whether it was the digital services renamed DOGE. What we know is Article 2 of the Constitution does invest all executive authority under the president, and the authority of the president in duly elected to be able to execute on the day-to-day operations is his prerogative. Additionally, I want to move to enter this letter from the Vice President of the Associated Builders and Contractors, a National Construction Industry Trade Association representing more than 23,000 members, requesting members of the committee reduce wasteful spending in infrastructure contracting by removing the Biden-Harris administration's project labor agreement that discouraged fair contract completion without objection. So ordered. With that, thank you to the witnesses for your testimony, to the members for your time, and now this committee stands adjourned.
Welcome to Right Side Broadcasting Network, your trusted conservative news outlet. At RSBN, we deliver the truth when the mainstream media falls short. Since 2015, we've proudly broadcasted every single one of President Trump's iconic MAGA rallies, bringing you the excitement and energy live before anyone else. By watching RSBN, you get an unfiltered front row view of the action on the ground. We interview the crowds to give a voice to millions of Americans just like you. We show you President Trump's speeches in their entirety, free from interruptions and censorship. We cover the stories that matter to you with the integrity and passion you deserve. Thank you for choosing RSBN as your home for America First News. Together, we stand strong, united, and informed. So join us and be part of the right side of history.
Parents, do your kids know what courage really means? It's about standing up for America even when there's a target on your back. That's why Mike Huckabee's team created the Kids Guide to the Courage of the President. This important guide tells kids everything they need to know about President Trump's unwavering courage, and you can get it for free. With your free order, you'll receive free bonus gifts, including the Kids Guide to President Trump and a Christmas ornament commemorating Trump's call for us to fight. Get it all for free at freetrumpbook.com. That's freetrumpbook.com.
Hey y'all, it's Silk from the Diamond and Silk Chit Chat live show. Look, don't forget to check me out right here on RSBN Network. Be sure to watch the show on Right Side Broadcasting Network, and I want you to support Right Side Broadcasting Network. Yes, it's imperative that you do so, okay? I look to see y'all soon. Bye-bye.
I hear every day about the products you all wish My Pillow carried. Well, guess what? We probably do. Slippers, bathrobes, pet beds, blankets, mattresses, sleepwear, loungewear, duvets, comforters, pot holders, aprons, oven mitts, and so much more. And they're all on sale. For example, get our best-selling standard My Pillows for only $14.98. Body pillows, $29.98. 6-piece bath towels or kitchen towel sets, just $29.98. Multi-use My Pillow 2.0s with pillowcase, $9.98. Save $40 on our Spring Percale and Giza Dream bedsheet sets. Any size, any color, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save up to 80% on all My Pillow products. And I've never done this before. When you spend $100 or more, you're going to get 2 standard My Pillows absolutely free.